I am pleased to welcome you to the DOC Expert Talk here at the Human Optics booth. We have gathered 4 top-notch speakers for you during this lunch break, who will share news and interesting insights about lenses, iris diseases, and treatments. My name is Christian Mayer. I am from Offenburg, and I will be guiding you through this event. Our first speaker, to keep us on schedule, is Mr. Parasta from Munich. He will be presenting on the new TRIVA multifocal lens. Mr. Parasta, the stage is yours.
Wonderful. If you want to stay on schedule, it was bold to let me go first. I will share some of my personal experiences with TRIVA, as well as some of the theory behind it. We need to clarify the definitions first. Nowadays, we no longer differentiate classically between multifocal and monofocal lenses. There are many circulating terms for multifocal lenses. Therefore, this broad classification is no longer very contemporary. Currently, we essentially have monofocal, monofocal plus, and the so-called CV lenses, continuous vision. These are lenses with more than 2 or 3 foci, essentially polyfocal lenses, and this is what we refer to with modern lenses. Let's make a brief comparison with how it was before. If we look at the principle of the 2 types of lenses, at the bottom is the so-called isofocal lens, also known as an EDOF lens. These lenses do not have a point image, but rather a line image. When you look at a pen from the front, it is always a point. When you look at it from the side, it is a line. And this is the principle of isofocality. This means you extend your focal point along an axis. The retina always looks from the front, creating what is known as pseudo-accommodation. This is how an isofocal lens works, which typically achieves this through changes in sphericity. The more spherical an optic is, the less precise it becomes, and we utilize this here. By making an optic more spherical, it makes light scattering easier. But it improves pseudo-accommodation because it allows us to image more points. If we look at the classic diffractive optics, like the lenses I used to implant before, such as the TRIVA, they have a far point, an intermediate area, and a near area, with points in between that are blurry. This is the classic trifocal lens as seen in older optics. Now, new optics are entering the market, known as hybrid lenses or continuous vision lenses, which start at 30 centimeters and cover up to infinity seamlessly. This means those gaps in between do not exist anymore. Everything is essentially isofocal, and this can be represented through various optical principles. A monofocal lens has a focus in the center, while a diffractive multifocal lens has 2 different foci and some overlap, which patients often describe as light scattering or halos with diffractive lenses. Refractive lenses, another principle for creating multifocality, result in a slightly blurrier image, but still allow for 2 distinct focal points. This is a segment lens as you know it, with a near segment at the bottom. This essentially distinguishes the 2 foci. You can also see that light is already being concentrated in between. This means that the hard edges, the sharp transitions where it becomes blurry, are not present. They are softer, more physiological. However, in terms of light scattering patterns, with the refractive lens, when the pupil dilates, the light scattering is somewhat different. This is a bit of a disadvantage of the refractive lens because it doesn't provide geometric round circles and halos, which the brain can eventually adapt to, but rather diffuse light scattering, producing large light blobs. This is something the brain doesn't necessarily handle well. Therefore, you see there is no perfect optics. Refractive optics have their advantages, such as seamless transitions, but also disadvantages like light scattering. Diffractive optics, on the other hand, offer sharper definitions, with their own pros and cons. How can we combine these aspects? By creating a lens that unites both principles. This means incorporating the advantages of refractive optics, both multifocal and monofocal, along with diffractive optics. These are the three areas I showed you earlier. Each has its advantages, and now let's see how we can combine all three benefits. Let's start in the middle, as the center is relevant for distance vision. Starting at the outer part, the refractive optic periphery of the TRIVA from HumanOptics. TRIVA is often thought of as a classic trifocal lens. It is not. In my opinion, the name doesn't quite fit because it is not a classic trifocal lens, but rather a continuous vision lens. If you watch it here at TRIVA, the refractive optical periphery is monofocal. It's logical because if your pupil goes to 6.5 millimeters to 7 millimeters when driving at night, you still have to be able to read the fine print? No, that's why it's not understandable why you have to open the diffractive optics to 6 millimeters. Because I need to see well in the distance at night. I don't need the light scattering of the diffractive element at all. I rather need the light output so that I can see better. That is, if I would wish for a lens, I would wish that it would become completely monofocal distance at night, with the highest blow for the distance. And as soon as I have light, it becomes completely multifocal close. That's how I would like it to be. Yes, and this wish is actually largely represented here. They have, so to speak, because the outer periphery is simply an aspherical monofocal optics, a really good light output in this area. In situations such as night driving, television, cinema, where distance plays a role and they don't really need the diffractive elements. Then we go to the inner zone here. On the inner zone, we have a monofocal principle again, but here we have a monofocal refractive principle. Basically, hopefully HumanOptics won't beat me up for that, but that's actually a monofocal plus lens in that area. In this middle, it's a monofocal plus lens, and that has a little bit. I don't want to look completely into the technology and Abby number and how the implementation of the optical index is. But here you work a bit with the optical index, so that you get a little more out of it than pure monofocal optics. And now comes the magic. Now I have to cover the middle and close range, and that's what I'm doing here, with a diffractive element. This is the central diffractive achromatic element. And which areas are relevant to everyday life? I need 30 centimeters to read, and the BG says I need 50 to 80 centimeters for a screen. And these are exactly the areas that the diffractive optical element can now secure. That's the area that you then secure. And now I would like to show you the comparison with a well-known classic EDOF lens. What it can do and what the TRIVA can do above. And you see the visual acuity on one side and you see the defocus on the other side. So you can read that a bit like addition. That's how you can read it roughly. And you can see that the EDOF lens actually starts to lose from 2 meters downwards. But why are we still very satisfied with the EDOF lenses? Because they can see that it drops, but it doesn't drop to 0, but to the visual acuity of 0.6. And so they can still read a mobile phone wonderfully. So that's suitable for everyday use, that's okay. But you can improve this a bit by elevating the whole thing through this combination of refractive and diffractive optics. That means you are then at a logmar visual acuity of 0.1, so you're actually 0.8 to 1.0 up there. Yes, that's the range that you can draw isofocally, i.e. equally strong, isofocal up to 33 centimeters. And that explains why this class of lenses is called continuous vision, i.e. seamless progressive lenses, if you will. This is a classic progressive lens, if you will. So now, of course, the question is, there is a diffractive element, so you must also have halos. Yes, of course you have halos. They are there. Yes, of course. But you have to remember that the strength and the expression of the halos depends on the area of the diffractive element. Of course, if you only have 30 to 35% of the amount of light from the diffractive element, you only have 30% halo production, and not like other lenses, where all diffractivity across the entire lens goes above 100%. That makes a big difference in how much light you chase through the diffractivity. And that's why when you ask the patients after a certain period of getting used to it, after 3 months, the studies that are cited here, halos, the patients only report 23 at all. So these light rings indicate 23. Starbursts 18. Radiation boundaries are never from the lens, but always only from the cornea. That is, they had it before, just didn't notice it because of the cataract, or even because of the metropy. No lens makes starbursts, and glare doesn't have them either, because that's the clarity of the optics. That means you have a high-quality look here, of course. That won't leave you with glare and glistening. That would be more of a topic. For example, we also look at the light distribution, and that is something that is highly interesting for me as a user. My patients are more in the refractive area, i.e. clear length exchange, than cataracts. That's why my patients don't come naturally from the MTF of 20% and look forward to 40. Cataract patients can be made happy with any still modest lens because they themselves have doubled the light efficiency and contrast with 40% light efficiency. The brain says, yay! If you do the same with a refractive clear length exchange patient, he vomits in your beam because he had 100% before and you brought it to 40%. That's why I think it's a bit unfair when colleagues ask, yes, the lens is great. Then the next question is with me, with cataract patients or with RLE patients. And if I have the answer here with cataract patient, it was great. With RLE patients, I haven't tried it yet. Then that says nothing about the lens. This means that clear lens must be compared with clear lens, not clear lens with cloudy lens. That is actually the unfair comparison. Pupil size, of course, also plays a role in such optics. But it is interesting how the light distribution is. With blue, you can see the light distribution at close range. Yellow is intermediate and dashed, blue is distant. And you see the larger the pupil gets, the better the light output for the distance. That is, this is the night lens, which means that it becomes brighter and brighter in the distance at night. And the smaller the pupil becomes, the more the closeness becomes, so to speak, better, but not in the same proportion. And that is very cleverly solved. This means that I always have a good light output in the near and intermediate range. As you can see, the light distribution is 30%. Yes, the light distribution of a classic trifocal lens from major manufacturers is also close to 30%. No one is better at that. Accordingly, you have to see and recognize that patients in the local and intermediate sector never really have an issue. If my refractive patients are dissatisfied after clear length exchange, i.e., even if I have promised closeness and have not kept it, forgive me if I take something away from you, no one will forgive me. That's why you always have to choose the lens according to what the distance does to the lens, especially in conditions with twilight and night. For me as a refractive surgeon, it is crucial for the choice of lenses because I want to have happy patients. Another topic about light absorption. This is a yellow filter lens, the TRIVA, so they are also available as yellow filter lenses. And if you look at them, where the filter is, again, very, very carefully thought. This means that we have a filter that actually covers the screen, mobile phone area, near range wonderfully, so that these patients don't need such a blue filter for screen and the like. They have already installed it, and this is a range that aligns with the natural lens over the wavelength of 500. This means that we have no more yellow or no less blue than the natural lens in our daily requirement, in our normal needs. That means we don't build an edge into them. This is important because there are different yellow colors in the market. There are cackling yellow lenses that really represent an edge filter. We don't have that here. But we have a frequency of about green upwards, completely natural color environment of a natural lens. I'll sum it up. This is my penultimate slide. The TRIVA is a hybrid optical design. That's something we don't quite know yet. That's a new class for me. It combines the advantages of EDOF and multifocal lenses, because isofocal elements as well as monofocal elements, as well as the diffractive elements, have been very cleverly combined with each other. Because I have a relatively large monofocal element in the middle, I have an otherwise big problem, but not with diffractive optics, namely when the patients have a high cord M value. So pupil decentering, we are all afraid of it. So especially the refractive surgeons. So if you see, oh, over 300 and you don't know, yes, that can cost him the distance. And that's why we've always been reluctant to use multifocal lenses. Some isofocal lenses are more forgiving, but this lens, in my personal experience, actually forgives up to 400 microns per pupil. Forgives it and just swallows away. And that's for me, so a monofocal lens always does. But with mutifocal lenses and with refractive lenses, that's a new class for me. I didn't have that before, and we have, so to speak. But you also have to look at the other corner. Higher order aberrations, over 400 microns. Z40 is the limit where I haven't dared to go over it yet, I have to say. Because there is a diffractive element in it. If you have a highly aberrative cornea with irregular astigmatism, possibly post-LASIK if it is completely crooked. Over the years, the cornea warps after LASIK. If it's regular, you can do it, but if it's not regular, you shouldn't. In terms of approval, they have no problem with the lens. Post-LASIK is not excluded with the lens. Accordingly, it depends on you whether you rate the cornea as regular or irregular in the evaluation. My recommendation is an edge of Z4400. Continuous vision lenses, multifocal lenses, diffractive optics, refractive endopathies are generally not recommended. If you have a cut, if you ask me where there's a cutoff value for 2500, I'm not going far below. These are patients who then change their refractions after all. Their astigmatism change, the higher aberration, rise over time over the endopathies. This means that in the long term, this is not a good option. However, this does not apply to the lens, but to everyone. It is not recommended for amblyopia and lack of stereo vision, because they have several foci isofocals. They have to process that. The brain has to learn it. After a year, they're okay. But the question is, do you want to listen to a year that it's not okay? That's the question. That's why, due to my very short patience, I don't do multifocal lenses for this patient with amblyophobia. That's your patience. Dependent. If you can manage it, listen to it for a year, you can do it. After a year, he's also satisfied. Very well suited, even with emitropen, where they always say, if he didn't have glasses before, you don't do a mutisocalens. If he didn't have distance glasses, you can forget about that here, because it's monofocal in the middle. He doesn't make any issues for you. That is, if he only comes for presbyopia or she only comes for presbyopia, they can do it too. I've done many. They are very satisfied patients. The first choices for me, at least for refractive lens replacement in patients who do not want to compromise at a distance and want a good solution for proximity and PC, you can make these patients very happy with it. Very, very fine and good for me is that the lens has a very low chair time. I do it simultaneously, which means one session with RLE in both eyes. Then they have 2 more checkup appointments and reunion. You have to call these patients afterwards so that they come back for checkups. They don't come anymore. They never saw it again. And I only know that from my ICL patients, whom you have to run after. But this is also a new class for me. For me, it's always the CLE patient, always a bit of a lot of chair time. That is not the case here. 5 to 6, these are the ones that are there very quickly, have the results very quickly, need very little consultation. If you want to start, this is the class you want to go into. Be sure to start with plus 10 or 16. So that might be the first choice, even if they don't have the highest level of suffering. You always think they can only be happy. Not quite true. If you prefer to go into the middle league, then you will have it easier. It is recommended to consider an early capsulotomy after just 3 months. Why? The more complex an optic is, the less it likes to feel irregularities behind the cornea, i.e., just as little as higher aberrations in the cornea. They also feel higher aberrations in the capsule, and this may be the case after only 3 months. I always use a capsular clamping ring on my refractive patients to simply control the capsular fibrosis a bit. But after 3 months in the standard, I already do a capsulotomy because then they keep the patient happy. That's very, very important in my eyes. That's exactly what I wanted to bring you from my experience. If you have any questions, please feel free to do so. However, I would probably find it hard to hear, as loud as it is here. Please take over.